Right. Well, first and foremost, let's say again, Happy New Year. And I think, as Ange quite nicely put it, I think it'll be the last one I'll do for the year, because otherwise I'll keep repeating myself. All right. I'd like to welcome you to the Nottinghamshire Local Pension Board meeting for 9th of January 2005, which is our first one for this year. In addition, I would also like, and I'm delighted to welcome two new members who, through a very exhaustive application process, made it to the board. So I'd like to welcome Joanne Mitchell and Kay Thompson. Is that right? Because is it the other way around? Yes. To the board. And our advisor John R. Raisin and Kieran, who are online. Kieran is from the investment office, and John Raisin is our independent advisor to the board. So you get to know who's who. So what I'd like to do is formally welcome Joanne as our employer representative and Kay as a representative to their first meeting. And if you two would like to just simply say a couple of words about yourselves.
Hi, I'm Joanne Mitchell. I work for Nottinghamshire Transport Limited. I'm the payroll manager, and I'm delighted to be invited to be on this board. It's something that I'm excited to be involved in, and I want to learn a bit more about it. So thank you for going through the process with me. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Kay Thomason-Vardy. I was looking at consolidating my pensions, and when I looked on my LGPS one online, I saw this opportunity, and I thought, what a great chance to try and understand pensions in general in more depth, and indeed my deferred pension more deeply. So I hope that's what this opportunity is, and that I am some use at some point.
That's great. You're very welcome. And I'd like to thank Sarah and Joe for their help in addressing the board membership and in the application and interviews and doing all the work that people don't see. So thank you very much for that. And I think just for our two new members, if we could do a round of introductions. And I think we shall start on this end with Noel and then end up with me.
Yes, I'm Noel McMenamin. I'm the Democratic Services Officer who administers this particular board meeting.
I'm currently Councillor there, and I've been around with the pensions funds for the last 20 years.
Mark Uppenstall works at Ashfield District Council, and I'm a representative for GMB Union. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Councillor Imran Jalil from Nottingham City Council. Thank you.
I'll find where I've hidden the microphone. I'm Jo, I'm the Governance Officer for the Fund, and obviously we've been corresponding in getting you here today.
I'm Sarah Stevenson, so I'm Group Manager for the Business Services Centre, and the Pension Administration service sits as part of my remit.
Hello, I'm Angela Shipston, and I've worked in the pensions department for 30 plus years, and I currently, for the last about 20 years, I've worked for the Employer Support and Compliance team under Andy's.
Hello, I'm Lee. I work with Ange, who's been here for 30-something years, and Andy's our boss, and I'm an Employee Support and Compliance Officer.
Hello, I'm Andy Durrant. I lead the Employee Support and Compliance function on behalf of the Pensions Office.
And then online, we start with Kieran.
Yes, here I am. I'm Kieran Guilfoyle. I work for the Pension Fund Investments team. So I kind of attend this if any questions come up regarding the pension fund investments side of things, and occasionally submit reports to the Pensions Board, I think particularly on the annual report that we produce.
If you just unmute yourself, John. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm John Hayes, and I'm the advisor to the board. So my role really is working with the officers and supporting the board members. I also prepare a number of reports, particularly an LGPS update report, which looks at issues primarily from a national rather than a Nottinghamshire perspective. And when I talk about the consultation in a little while, I will talk about it from a national LGPS specific perspective rather than from a Nottinghamshire specific perspective. I've been the advisor to the board since 2015, so I've got quite a long provenance with the board, and worked with the chair in particular for and the lead officer for quite a time. Thank you.
We've no apologies from board members. However, Councillor Kerry, who has a standing invite, is unable to attend on this occasion as for sickness reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. At the meeting in October, we brought a presentation about the pension systems that are used by the team, and within the covering report, I covered off a schedule of the other teams that make up the pension administration service coming along to the board meetings to give a more in-depth presentation about the work that they are actually involved in. So the team that have come along today that you've obviously had an introduction from are the Employer Support and Compliance team. All three, well, there's actually 4 members of the team. Unfortunately, one of the team members is off sick at the moment. But I'm going to hand over to Andy so he can give you a more in-depth presentation about the work of the team and the sorts of things that they are involved in. So I'll hand over to Andy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Right, welcome everybody to this kind of 10 to 15 minute-ish presentation, I'm told. So there's quite a lot to go through in terms of employer support and compliance functions. So I'll leap straight in. You should have all, obviously you've got access to the slides, and you would have all received a copy of these, I think, in advance as well. So I'll just start. I'll start running through. Yeah.
Are you happy to wait for the questions at the end, or do you want questions as we go through?
Don't mind.
No mind.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to take questions as we go through.
Okay.
If you like, or at the end. So yeah, whichever. Okay. Okay. That one. Okay. Okay. So. Let's see. Right. Okay. So, employer support compliance team. Structure the team: myself, 2.8 FTE staff, Ange being the 0.8 FTE staff, 4 days a week, Lee, and as Sarah said, another member of the team who works full time as well, Stephanie Blair as well. So we are one team across a number of different teams within the pensions administration area. Our general role is, as the Cayman name really implies, employer support and compliance. So we work with all the employers in the pension fund to ensure they fulfil their responsibilities, not just in accordance with the scheme regulations, but in terms of overarching pension legislation, and of course in accordance with the fund's requirements as well, in accordance with the admin strategy. So that's really what we're fundamentally about for those employers who have got access. Obviously, we also support employers to gain access to the scheme as well. Okay. Also, in terms of exiting the scheme, because employers do come and go, and we get involved on bulk arrangements between employers as well. Okay, and I'll explain a little bit more about that shortly. We also get involved in ensuring the employers hand over the contributions that they should be doing, which of course is a requirement to do that on a monthly basis, and complete all scheme returns as well. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. We also do audits as well, because on occasions we have employers of all different shapes and sizes, of course, all got different needs, and there may be times when we need to give dedicated resource and focus on a particular employer for a combination of reasons, really. So we do audits as well, and another main focus of the team is to ensure that, in addition to the support that we give to the employers, is to communicate changes that are occurring, not just in relation to scheme rules, but also in terms of just general administration areas that an employer may need to focus on, which clearly can differ as the scheme year progresses as well. So we're in regular contact with employers. Joanne, as an employer representative, you may well receive communications from us on a fairly regular basis, covering a range of issues: guidance, planning, actions, prompts, and training opportunities as well. So that's ultimately what we're here for. Go and explain a little more depth on each of those things. In terms of employers' responsibilities, the scope is clearly wide there. The requirements under the scheme regulations are obviously quite significant. These, of course, will be the LGPS regulations 2013, as well as the overarching pension legislation and requirements of the fund through the admin strategy. That's quite a lengthy document as well. So ultimately, we're here to ensure or to support those employers in terms of undertaking those general responsibilities there. Now, what I've tried to do with that slide is just trying to put those general responsibilities into 5 broad areas. So responsibilities including requirement to publicise the scheme. There's responsibility there. We run the scheme. The employer obviously is there to ensure that actually they apply those regulations, ensure they communicate and make eligible members aware as to the rules of the scheme and opportunities that might exist for the scheme as well. So that's part of general responsibility. The key thing for us as well, because we've got so many employers, is knowing who to contact the employers as well. So it's absolutely key that an employer communicates with us so we know who to speak to in the event of a particular query, and we collect employers' contacts, a range of different contacts depending upon the nature of the subject. So general admin, somebody with strategic responsibility as well, somebody to deal with disputes, somebody to deal with the finance side of things, because there's obviously a lot of money involved here, and somebody to deal with key issues associated with year-end expectations as well. So those are real key things, and an expectation of employers that they retain the information they need in order to fulfil their responsibilities, and that pretty much relates to a lot of their pay, HR information, historic data, because without them, they can't provide the fund with the information we require in order to calculate members' benefits. Okay. Second element of that is member administration. Fundamentally, this breaks down to ensuring that employers tell us about their starters, their leavers, and their changes. That's very, very simplistic, but making sure that we get to know who's in the scheme, who's left the scheme, and the individual's personal details. I mentioned as well about contribution returns. Okay, the employers must band individual members in the scheme as well. As you know, there's variable bands for employees in the scheme, depending upon earnings, etc. And that's an employer responsibility to ensure they band. So we'll advise them in relation to that, and ensure as well that they are handing over contributions which need to be submitted in a timely manner, because we're dependent obviously on our cash flow. Okay, and support them through returns. The most notable return for the year is obviously the year-end return, because we're still, for individual membership records, we're still working on an annual cycle in relation to that. Okay. There's also an expectation for employers to inform us of information throughout the year as well, especially in relation to benefits, leavers, estimates as well. So there's a responsibility there. And there's a key responsibility on employers as well to keep the fund informed if they're planning to do things in a different way. So service changes, reviews, reorganisations, outsourcings, all of those types of things we will support the employer with. Yes.
Over the years, my involvement this has always been a difficult area for the scheme, getting employers and different employers to actually respond in the way that they should respond.
Mm-hmm.
Is any of that improved, or are you still battling with the things that you battled with, say, 10 years ago?
I would say the position 10 years ago has improved significantly, yeah, despite the fact that we've got significantly more employers in the fund than we had 10 years ago, mainly associated with an increase in outsourcings and academy conversions. So, yeah, I think the position has improved, but we still have challenges. We've got a large number of employers. As I say, different employers come in different shapes and sizes. And sometimes you can face a situation where an employer has always fulfilled its duties and responsibilities to the scheme, and then a key member of staff might leave. And if there hasn't been an appropriate handover of duties and responsibilities, then that can suddenly become a challenge. Okay, so I think our relationships with scheme employers are good. But do we have challenges with certain employers in the fund? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely we do. But fundamentally, is the position any better than it was 10 years ago? I would say undoubtedly it is. Yeah. Okay. So that's service changes. Going on specifically about employer access, hopefully you're all aware that the scheme regulations allow a combination of different routes into the scheme. And I've broken those down just for your information into the typical kind of routes of access. The vast majority of employers that enter the scheme are employers that do so because they're required to legally. Okay, so they're known as compulsory bodies, and that will include obviously the largest employers in the fund, from the county, the city, the districts, the borough councils, fire, police, but a significant number there associated with academy trusts and individual academies that have obviously increased significantly over the last 10, 12 years since the Academies Act was introduced. So those are bodies that are legally required to join. We also have some bodies that are able to join if they so wish, and they are noticed, they're designating bodies, and those are employers that kind of fit the category as say that they can offer the scheme if they so wish. They may choose not to. They're not legally obliged to, but obviously they're still obligated to provide some form of overarching pension provision for individuals in accordance with overall pension bill. But a number of bodies do come in, designating bodies, and they get to make the decision. If they want to come in, then the scheme regulations allow for that. There's no discretion on admission. Okay, we have to allow those bodies in, and provided they make an appropriate designation and resolution there, then they come into the scheme. And the biggest proportion of those designating bodies are parish councils. Okay. And then we also have a number of admission bodies in the scheme as well, and those are made up of community type organisations and what we call transferring type bodies. Those community type organisations are organisations that have got a close connection with perhaps a compulsory scheme employer, perhaps undertake tasks that are somehow complementary to the work that's undertaken within the public sector as a whole, maybe grant funded by organisations, compulsory bodies as well. And we do have some charities in the scheme as well. Okay. The more common one, numbers of transferee bodies, because over the last decade or so, there's been a quite significant increase in outsourcing arrangements. And the transferee mission bodies, they come and go depending upon service contracts, the duration of those. But they are bodies that tend to be undertaking a function of a scheme employer. Perhaps they've decided to outsource commonly things like catering, cleaning functions. And in that situation, if that organisation then chooses to secure pension protection via the LGPS, again, we're obliged to admit those organisations into the scheme. So that's a little about the different types of employers that we support. So this is one of those things about all shapes and sizes, different types, different backgrounds, employers ranging from 15,000 members all the way down to one, which might be the parish clerk, for instance. So that in terms of employer access, again, I mentioned the compulsory designating bodies. They are reported to committee. each year as part of the performance report, but we're required to obviously admit those organisations, so there's no written access agreement. With mission bodies, there is what's called an admission agreement to formalise their access as well, so we're involved in ensuring that that happens. That document is formalised, because then, once it is, that means the staff that have been associated or that have triggered that application have pension protection formalised. Okay. We also get involved in securing, in looking into securities as well, potentially bonds as security, because obviously with the scheme, there's cash flows here. Where there's cash, there's financial risk. Where there's financial risk, obviously, we then need to look at, or scheme employers also need to look at closely, how that will be managed if something unforeseen happened. And that may well be in the form of some kind of bond, or security, like insurance policy, maybe a parental company guarantee, something of that nature. But, or indeed, we go on to mention there about pass-through arrangements. That might be where a scheme employer has decided to take on some elements of risk, because of course if they decided not to outsource that function, that financial risk would have remained with them as well. So it's ensuring that, ultimately, I suppose putting it very clearly, it's making sure that somebody is on the hook. We're covered as a fund to make sure that somebody is going to pick the tab up somewhere along the line. Okay. And then as part of the employer access as well, having secured those admission agreements and admitted those organisations as well, we obviously follow through there and do induction events as well, because the duties and responsibilities are wide ranging. Okay. That's employer access. We do have employer exits. Again, those are reported as part of Sarah's performance report. And employers do exit the fund, either for a combination of reasons, either because they've been an admitted body and they've closed because a service contract has come to an end, or maybe that organisation has run its course, it's ceased to operate. We occasionally have employers that are made insolvent as well, and we have to, from a pensions perspective, close those organisations down and do closure valuations, cessation valuations in effect, to make sure that ultimately all those contributions we've paid in over the years, both from the member and the employer and the investment yields we've got, are ultimately we've got enough cash there to make sure we can pay the pension promises to the staff. Okay. And if there is a shortfall, then clearly we've got to make sure that we've got that covered somewhere along the line, and that's where things like bonds and securities come in. Okay. Equally, if they close and the assets equal the liabilities, then great, everybody walks away with a smile on the face, clear. Yeah, nothing else to pay. If there's a surplus, then there's potential provision within the payment scheme regulations to actually award a surplus payment to an exiting employer, providing they make a business case to do so. So all of those things are undertaken as part of exit arrangements. And if we do have an employer that's gone down the insolvency route, then we will put a proof of debt form into the insolvency practitioner to get what we can out of the available assets from that exiting employer. So that's employer exits. We also deal with the bulk transfers. Bulk transfers are basically large-scale transfers, potentially between employers, but also potentially between funds as well, where you've perhaps got a service or maybe a service transfer between different employers, or an employer that's taken a function from X county, and in order to actually progress that, we don't undertake these things on individual member approvals and for calculation purposes. We do these arrangements by a bulk arrangement. Obviously, we communicate with all the staff in terms of that, but it involves a lot of work, obviously, with the respective fund actuaries to calculate issues around assets and liability transfers. So we get involved with that, and I mentioned there about communication with members regarding the bulk transfers. I mentioned earlier about contribution income. Employers should deduct contributions from staff every month, and then they should pay those contributions over by the 17th of the month following deduction. And obviously our responsibility is to make sure they do that as well. We need that cash flow in. So whilst we have an arrangement with ultimately our income team as part of the wider BSC, ultimately then if an employer isn't paying over what they should be paying over, or hasn't paid over at all, then it becomes a compliance issue. And those types of things come to the team here to follow up with that individual employer. Okay. And also one of the key things for us is ensuring that start of each scheme year as well, the employer is deducting the appropriate contribution rate because, as you know, the fund is valued every 3 years, whilst primary rates tend not to change in intervaluation periods, secondary rates do. Secondary rates being deficit recovery, and those rates can change year on year. So obviously we need to ensure that that employer is applying that and handing over those contributions as well. So that's something that is obviously quite a chunk of work early on in the scheme year with each employer. Okay. I mentioned earlier about employer audits as well. We will go through a particular employer, could be for any number of reasons, but it's often triggered by recent experience of that employer's actions. So it may well be that, like I mentioned earlier, an employer has actually fulfilled all its responsibilities in the scheme, trouble-free for some years, and then a couple of key members of staff leave, and then suddenly we've got some particular challenges there, and it may well be that that highlights issues of support and member maintenance issues that we need to deal with. So we will undertake audits as well of employers, as I say, often triggered by recent experience, really. We'll look at individual member records, and then we will work with that employer then to make sure that the fund is updated on the information that obviously they should be doing as part of their general scheme employer responsibilities. Okay. And then it's a case of working either with them, potentially with third parties, because a lot of employers obviously go to third-party providers for issues around HR and pay, etc. So we'll work with all parties really to try and make sure that those membership records as they should be. Okay, and an audit is one method of being able to give some focused support on a particular employer for that reason. Okay, that's audits. So fundamentally, those are the kind of the duties, responsibilities I'll kind of summarise. I'm sorry if I've got a bit over. But improvements and developments over the course of the year, as you all know, the fund is subject to a triennial review. So the key thing this year is obviously the fund valuation. So that happens at 31st of March, 1st of April 2025. So that's an absolute key focus for everybody really in the Pensions Office. The other issues that we're going to get involved in, or we're already involved in, but we need to kind of roll out further, is we already have an employer portal in place with a limited number of users. We've got a new version of that. That new version needs to be rolled out. We've got some combination of different parties involved in that at the minute, a combination of technical issues, but we need to roll that out to those existing members and then roll that out further to remaining scheme employers. Having done that, then that means that we can progress to something that we've been kind of an aspirational development, shall we say, over the last couple of years related to monthly data collection as well. Okay, rather than working on an annual cycle, to start working on a monthly arrangement, so we get that information in more regularly. Any particular issues we can deal with as at that point in time, and it brings all sorts of benefits in terms of obviously having more up-to-date data at any given point. We're also expecting more employer amalgamations. I mentioned earlier about the employer numbers, and on that pie chart I gave, there was 292 employers on there. That's how many active employers that we had at that point in time. Occasionally we will deal with employer amalgamations as well. Okay, so basically by that is that we took a line, we implemented an approach a few years ago where certainly amongst certain employers, Academy Trusts are a classic example of this, where the individual academies were set up as separate sub-employers within the pension fund, okay, to no actual practical benefit really, either to the member, to the employer, or to the fund. Okay, so we took an approach a few years ago whereby we'd look to amalgamate some of those employers to ease administration, cut down on things like submission returns, contribution returns, ease of administration in terms of individual member maintenance, and actually that 292 employers I mentioned earlier, if we hadn't approached that, we'd actually have 420 employers in the pension fund at the moment if we hadn't taken that approach. And believe me, it's to all of our mutual benefit, the employers concerned as well, because it means that it simplifies administration, makes it much more cost effective, both from an employer perspective and also from a fund perspective. So we're expecting more of those during the course of the year. Occasionally, we will have requests for employer disaggregations as well. So an employer that has already consolidated, or we've had to disaggregate for a particular reason, maybe because part of that employer has had to move to another employer and another part has moved to somewhere else. So we will occasionally have to disaggregate, and that's normally associated with the kind of the structure of a particular employer, and possibly even an insolvency situation or a closure. So we've had closures where they've triggered disaggregations. Academy trust closures notably as well has kind of triggered that. So we'll try and get employers to come together, but equally we'll have occasions when we need to split an employer apart. Okay, and of course, as Sarah will have mentioned on a number of occasions, there's an ongoing improvement in ways of working for the Pensions Office, and therefore we as an employer support and compliance team will obviously input on that as well. In addition to other issues around whole office projects, which are numerous. I'm sure Sarah's mentioned a lot of these things, but things that we'll be dealing with recently are issues around National Frauds Initiative, things like that. So that's the kind of flavour of the challenges ahead, should we say, during 2025. And that's it. Apologies, I've gone a bit over. Okay.
Right. Questions, Councillor Day?
Sorry, Councillor, can you use your microphone?
Oh, good. Yeah, with the employer audits, do you get compliance with the audits? Is it difficult to get the employers to comply with what you want from them? And also, then I've got a couple of things, and then you can think about. Secondly, on that, going forward, does it cause quite a lot of administration costs the way we have to do this? If it was done differently?
Okay.
And in the future, will AI or technology help to improve the situation?
That may well be the case, yeah. In terms of okay. Now, in terms of compliance, there's it becomes an issue in terms of level of engagement of employers. Okay, so we're here to support and ensure they comply. Okay, so we will give them whatever support the employer may need to undertake that task. But there comes a point when, through ongoing support, okay, and provided we're giving them the tools they need to do the job, okay, then they need to run with that. Okay, but so equally then that then becomes a compliance issue. Okay, in which case there'll be some enforcement action there. Okay, which is in effect what we've written into and will further write into in terms of the admin strategy. Okay, so yes, we will support them to undertake those actions, and then ultimately there will be a price to pay, should we say, in terms of lack of compliance. Okay, is it a challenge? Yes, it is, because you get different levels of compliance. You know, we've got 292 active employers issuing the fund, and you've got some employers there are large organisations that have dedicated members of staff looking at the pension scheme. You have smaller organisations where the pensions may well just be a very small area of that person's job description. Okay, they may not come across particular issues very often, and when they do, it's a learning curve every time. So it very much depends upon the employer, okay, how they're set up, scale of that employer, and their level of overall engagement in terms of how easy it is to make sure that they fulfil their duties and responsibilities. In terms of costs, obviously the posts are funded to undertake that function, so that comes out. But if we get to a point where there's elements and compliance issues there, then part of the redress there will be we will cover additional costs incurred associated with that lack of performance. So, in terms of AI, who knows? Things are developing so quickly on that front. It's you'd kind of expect that the way technology is that things will continue to take bounds forward. But yeah, you kind of expect that there will be some benefits associated with that. Quite what? It's difficult to say, isn't it? I know it's a new word. So, yeah.
Can I just add a couple of things there, please? So from the admin strategy point of view, Andy and the team are going to be reviewing the fund's admin strategy in the final quarter of the year. They've done some research work already. I'm conscious that we report on the administration team's performance, but a lot of our performance is impacted by what the scheme employer provides or doesn't provide to us. So part of that review will look at reporting on scheme employer performance, and my ask of both committee and board, once we obviously start to do that, is I think this is where you as a board and committee can support the team in actually holding scheme employers, accountable for their responsibilities, because they are quite diverse, the responsibilities. It isn't just paying over the contributions, it's about them also undertaking their responsibilities for the internal disputes resolution procedure, which as an adjudicator myself, I know can be quite complex, quite timely, but the stage one response invariably sits with the scheme employer. And there's been a recent case where the employers just simply sent it into the fund, and we've simply sent it back to them and said, no, that's for you to do. So I think, clearly starting to gather and measure scheme employers' performance will start quite small, and then I think that will mature over time as well. And I'm expecting ultimately we get to a position where we can tell each scheme employer which sort of like quadrant they are within, and whether or not they need to improve, and what Andy's team then may support them with to improve. From a point of view of technology, clearly technological advances are, moving at a pace. From the previous presentation, clearly we have a system that has a whole sort of facet of modules available to it. What we're currently working on is moving the system off premise and into a cloud-based solution. Clearly that gives us a set of benefits. It doesn't remain on premise anymore, so you're subjecting the system to ongoing releases, updates, etc. But our current contract with Civica also over the 7 years gives us an opportunity to take on more and more modules. We obviously, as Andy's rightly said, we've talked about the employer portal and moving to the new hub, and also then rolling out monthly returns. I think we shouldn't underestimate the benefit the fund gets from being part of the county council, in the fact that obviously the county council has a set of operating procedures for its cloud environments, and what's actually happened, we've identified a security issue which we need to address before we roll that out. We've got to that position because of the ICT infrastructure being provided by IT from the council. So I think, we shouldn't underestimate those benefits. Future modules will enable us to consider chatbots, web chat, that type of thing, giving members themselves access from a portal so that they can verify their own and update their own personal details. Lots of people want to simulate what would my pension benefits be at 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, all the way through to state pension age. Clearly, we are not going to sit there and generate up to 12 estimates for an individual. That isn't, I think, appropriate for the office to do, but other individual members may wish to do that as well. From an AI perspective, who knows, Councillor Adair, that is moving at such a pace these days. But I think the key thing for us is the foundation in quality data to enable us within the office to automate our process. And I'll be talking about that in the admin update later on. Thank you.
Any further questions? Yeah, Joanne?
Hi, Andy. The portal that you that's going to exist, the current one, when did you say that was going to happen? Is that later on this year, or we've not got an idea yet?
Yes. The rollout is there's a number of technical issues and that need to be resolved before the portal is already there. There is a portal and employers are currently using it, but we need to move to a new version of it. That is the bottom line. So the key thing there was converting those current users over to the new version before we then roll that out further.
Yeah.
Okay. The main benefit of that is that it will enable employers further down the line to obviously submit information securely via that particular route. Okay. But what it's really going to give us is a pathway really to doing monthly data collection. That's really the key thing. In terms of timescales, I can't confirm a timescale in a minute because of the technology reasons. IT and a combination of other people are looking into it.
Will the monthly reporting replace the year-end report?
It will.
It will. Yeah.
It will.
Okay.
Monthly reporting will replace a lot of general administration actions.
Oh, okay.
So things like starter notifications, leaver notifications, changes, personal detail changes, all of those types of things. So there's a perception out there when people hear the word term monthly data collection, suddenly they're going to have to do things 12 times a year that they used to do once. Okay, and it's not, because what it is going to do is it will stop you having to undertake some of those kind of business as usual general scheme employer actions throughout the course of the scheme year. So at that point in time, there will come a point when all those other things that are kind of quite time consuming to employers, you'll no longer need, because hopefully you'll have an MDC, you'll have a payroll system where you can get a data extract down in accordance with the MDC format, and obviously the ideal work will be you'll press that button, that'll be an output in the appropriate format straight into the system. Okay?
And that will help.
And it should get cost savings both on behalf of the fund.
That's what I'm
about
to say. It'll be cost saving for all around, won't it? So okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions? I've got just a couple. The first one is, I'm going to be replacing the existing portal for the new one. Would it be monitoring it and using the feedback I get from the users in order to improve?
Yeah, in terms of the new version as such, first of all we've got to roll that out, but fundamentally the functionality, there's no real significant change on the functionality as things stand. Okay, the focus will be on, in effect, rolling out the new version. Okay, then extending that out obviously to other employers in the pension fund. Now, in terms of feedback, we obviously always encourage employers to provide feedback on all areas of service provision undertaken by the pensions office. So there'll be no difference in terms of the hub. In terms of then improvements, then obviously if we think that is something of benefit to the fund and employers as a whole, then that would be something that potentially we could look into and potentially commission, give us some of our own support to see if we can develop that in a different way, or add additional functionality. Or potentially, like we said, with MDC or supersede certain things, you might find that actually we remove functionality because it will be superseded by other benefits.
And also, just in addition, I think something that Councillor Dale was probably talking about in your earlier question, and one of the problems has always been that there's always been a lag in the accuracy of information, which is why when you wait to the end, if people have changed or things have changed, then the information you get is not going to be accurate and up to date, and that means that there's a lot more getting back to trying to find information. But however, going to this new monthly report, obviously that means there's greater engagement, and you can nip things in the bud before they get to the year end and just make sure that everything is up to date. And not only do you get that engagement, but you also get you get to know who the main people are who you need to contact. And I know that previously what used to happen was if anybody was late, there used to be a situation whereby we knew who they were and they'd get fined, but there's a lot of more work done before they actually got to the finding stage. So I think this will help refine that system.
Well, what it will do is, in effect, it will bring those things forward at an earlier date and mean that we can be more proactive in terms of dealing with those actions. Yeah, because as things stand, if we're on an annual cycle there, we may well, as a part of the annual arrangement, come up with something that's happened very early on in the scheme year. So therefore, a number of months may have passed, maybe up to 11 months will have passed, therefore, since that change has occurred. All sorts of things can happen in that period of time. They might have data retention issues, they might have changed their payroll provider in the intervening period. So what it will mean is that we'll get to hear about what the issues that much closer to the occurrence of the event is the bottom line. Yeah, in which case you'd expect, therefore, the employer will be in a lot better position to be able to respond properly. Yeah, and accurately, obviously.
Right. Thank you. Any further questions on the floor or online? No, if not, just like to thank you very much, Andy, Lee, and Ange, for your attendance. You're free to leave if you wish, or stay for the rest of the meeting. But I think you might probably prefer.
Oh, thanks, Darren. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let's see if I can. All right. I think we'll just wait for Councillor Jalil to come back. But the recommendation is that we note the report and the presentation. Okay. Right. And for John and Kay, was there anything else that you wish to ask that you didn't feel like you could ask at this time? No? No?
I do just question. I've got both lights on.
Sorry.
I do just question. Obviously, they're trying to get employers to comply, and I would just wonder whether the education of pensions needs to start much earlier in an individual sort of stance. It seems like a lot of the powers to be have to answer when actually everybody underneath perhaps needs a bit more understanding in order for that compliance to be easier. It's just what popped into my head that perhaps some information on a younger level. I'm 35 years old, and a lot of people my age don't pay 1 iota to pensions. So they join a job, they get enrolled, they go whatever, and I think if someone dies, you ring the gas, you ring the electric, you ring the water, but I doubt people ring the pension companies to say what happens here at my age and younger. So that was, I don't know if it's relevant, but that was the question that popped into my head.
I think Sarah will be able to answer that for you.
Okay, I think you make a really valid point there. I think what we see is often that individuals are not taking responsibility for a whole host of things. So they don't take responsibility for alerting us to a change of address. Then at some point in the future they say, why haven't I been having a benefit statement? We check their address, they've not updated us with their address. Clearly, you know, when you send out a benefit statement, it contains significant personal data. When that form is returned to us, we mark as gone away because we don't want to be sending more out to an incorrect address. Again, just generally people where they may have transferred or considered transferring a pension in from another organisation, they don't follow that up to conclusion. We do get things wrong, so you know, I think that's where an individual's responsibility comes in, that actually they've asked for a transfer, whilst we have a responsibility as the fund, there's an individual have a responsibility to follow that all the way through. You know, people I think have some very different expectations to service this day and age, but actually they've not provided us with data in the first place. So I think, to me, it's almost like a triangle. There's the responsibility and the obligations of the fund, the individual themselves, but also the employer. All three parties have a part to play in that, but also I take your point about educating earlier, and to me very much so this is about actually that sort of education that starts in schools around budgeting, but also about preparing and saving for the future as well. that the state isn't always going to be there to pick that up, and actually what is your responsibility as an individual. So I think there's many facets there, aren't there? A number of those will not be areas that we can address ourselves.
Okay, thank you very much. Mark?
Regarding to that one, yeah, I think the key one to this one is the earlier the better, and the education the better. And I can only use Ashfield District Council as an example. Through the unions, we are pushed and pushed for them to put on a presentation about preparing for retirement. It's not about the end, it's about starting. A lot of individuals will know around this room about ABCs. But you speak to an individual, and they don't know what you're talking about. They're talking in a foreign language. When you explain to them that ABCs, additional voluntary contributions, you can add more to put to your pension, etc., and that will be, because when I speak to mums and say, look, you want to get your name down on this course, what's it about? Preparing for it. Oh, I'm not finishing for another 20, 30 years. Oh, well, this is the time now when you want to be preparing, not wait till the end. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Shall we move on to the next item, which is item 6 on the agenda. That's the Nottinghamshire Local Pension Board LGPS update. And for this, our advisor, John Razor, will give us an update, continuing specifically on the Fit for the Future government consultation. I'd like to propose the following recommendation, which is on page 24 of the pack, that the Pensions Board receives and considers the report of the advisor of the Pension Board, identifying any actions required. Do I have a second? Thank you very much, Councillor there. I'll now invite John Rayson to introduce the update.
Thanks, Chair. As I said at the pre-agenda, this may take some time because this is... Can you hear me?
Oh, you can, yeah.
Yeah.
Loud
because this is probably the most important consultation of the past 10 years relating to the LGPS. And the outcome of this will have a fundamental effect on the future of the scheme. I'm addressing this from a national perspective, not a Nottinghamshire specific perspective. Nottinghamshire will, as will the other 85 LGPS funds across England and Wales, hopefully respond individually to this, and there will be different responses from different funds. However, I think there are some very clear themes within that consultation, and those are the issues I'd like to cover. This consultation was issued on the 14th of November and it closed on the 16th of January 2025. Well, those of you who have long experience of consultations, as I know some of you do in the room, will think, that's unusual. And you're correct, because that is only a 9-week consultation. Now, normally we have a 13-week consultation for a significant matter. And if you recall the 2023 consultation, which this is a development of, which was similar to this consultation, that was 13 weeks, and that's the usual. So we have 9 weeks, and as I'll explain to you, huge potential changes. Why do we have 9 weeks? Well, I think the answer is given in paragraph 53 and 54. And this also, I think, illustrates the determination of the government to carry through something of a change. Whether it's the changes proposed here or whether they alter them as a result of responses from funds, we don't know. But what do they say at paragraph 53? They say the government believes that reforming pooling will deliver the full benefits of scale. Subject to the outcomes of this consultation, the government will consider legislating. And then in 54, it refers to the pension schemes bill. So what the government's saying here essentially is that we're thinking possibly of primary legislation. Now, as those of you who have been around for some time know, primary legislation is virtually never used specifically with regard to the LGPS. It's very, very rare. I think 2013 was the last specific time, which was part of the Public Service Pensions Act, but that covered the 7 major public service schemes. So the fact they're talking about primary legislation and not regulations, which in themselves are only changed after, very careful and normally long thought, is, I think, very, very significant and should be borne in mind in terms of everything I say after this. So the consultation covers three big areas. One is LGPS pooling, second is local investment, and the third is the governance of LGPS funds and pools. What I would say is that essentially increasing the role of the pools is the big headline. That's the obvious thing that jumps out at you. But you need to look also at the Pensions Investment Review interim report, which was issued by the government at the same time, because that clearly indicates that it isn't really just about pooling. It's also about pensions being used by government for economic growth. Now, this isn't a party political issue, because if you recall, in the 2023 consultation, the previous government proposed something very similar. Because essentially, government has come to the view, and this goes back to 2015, recall, because when Brandon Lewis, who was the then minister, first proposed an amalgamation of funds, rather than pooling, he wanted to go down from the then 89 to about 8 funds, but he was dissuaded from that, and we had a situation where the 89, now 86 remain, but they set up the pools to facilitate investment. At that stage, it was about a national wealth fund, etc. So government has long had this idea that somehow pensions can be utilised for economic growth. So we need to bear that in mind in all of this. So these proposals in the consultation are nothing new. They build upon what has happened since 2015, the guidance of 2015, which is still extant. They develop further the aborted consultation of 2019, which you'll recall, or some members will, was issued and then withdrawn, and then the consultation of 2023. And there are a lot of similarities, you'll notice, between the 2023 consultation and this consultation. However, this consultation takes things further, because I think essentially government stroke civil servants have thought about the responses to the 2023 consultation and have amended some of their proposals so as to overcome perhaps some of the objections that came at that point. So essentially, this consultation is very clear that they want to improve, as far as they're concerned, the investment potential of the LGPS. But they are also very clear that they think pensions, or the LGPS, and also private sector pensions, remember, DC schemes, can be used for growth. And that's very clear if you look at Pensions Investment Review interim report, both the statement by Emma Reynolds, who's the MP and Minister for Pensions, but also particularly by Jim McMahon, who's the Minister for Local Government, who's actually the Minister in charge of the LGPS, who actually states on page 7 of that, and I'll read it, he says, "My vision for the LGPS is that it plays a significant part of the government's growth mission, sitting alongside our major programmes to rebuild Britain's infrastructure." That's very similar, you might recall, to what was said in 2023 consultation when the previous government talked about the LGPS investing a certain proportion of assets in what they then called levelling up. So we've got a similar theme here going through the 2023 and 2024 consultation. I want to say that particularly because I want to get anyone who might be thinking, I'm sure no one is, away from the idea that somehow this is a party political thing or whatever. It's not. This is about government and economic growth, whatever government, and pensions. Now, the thing we need to recall in all this is the purpose of pensions and the LGPS is primarily not economic growth. The role is to pay the pensions are promised to the 6.7 million members under the LGPS regulations. And it's clear that fiduciary duty, as set out, for example, in the opinion that the LGA got from Nigel Giffin QC in 2014, that investment is the primary function. Investment to return enough money to pay the pensions is the primary function of the LGPS when it comes to investment. It's not about anything else. It's not about fulfilling ESG requirements. It's not about economic growth. It's about fundamentally getting the best risk-adjusted return to meet the liabilities. And as we know, the LGPS is already very successful in that. In fact, it was 107% funded at the last valuation across England and Wales. And the Nottinghamshire Fund itself, I mentioned Nottinghamshire for once, was itself over 100% funded. And so therefore, even at that point, I think things have got a little better since then. The LGPS had, you know, in reality, excess funds over what is needed to meet the pensions. So that's where we are. That's the sort of background. So what does this propose? Well, essentially, this consultation proposes something absolutely fundamentally different for the future than we have had in the LGPS in the past. And the LGPS, remember, was founded in 1923. What we have always had is the LGPS funds, what they call the administering authorities, have been responsible for investment issues. Now, the pooling process was formed on the basis that responsibility for the implementation of investment strategy would pass to the pools, but implementation strategy, which is the most important part of investment, remember, it's not what manager you choose, it's what investment classes and allocations of assets you choose, which is most important. It's what you decide to invest in, not who you invest with, which is the most important part of an investment return. And that's been proved by many, many academic studies over the years, and there's no doubt or questions to that. So what they said in 2015 was, the funds remain responsible for investment strategy, the pools implement it. This turns it all on its head. This basically says, in this consultation, no, the pools will be responsible for investment strategy because the funds will be required to take their principal advice on investment strategy from a pool, not from a provider of their own choice. Now, at the moment, each LGPS fund chooses its investment consultant. You use an organisation called Linchpin, not Nottinghamshire. Others use various others. I mean, particularly Hymans Robertson and Mercer are the two biggest providers of investment consultancy. They're saying, no, this arrangement has been very successful, has resulted in 107% funding nationally at the last valuation. This is to be done away with, and the pools in future will provide your investment strategy advice. Well, actually, most of the pools don't have anybody who's capable of providing such advice. The investment consultants have huge expertise and experience in LGPS, so they're going to say, they propose to turn this completely on its head, and basically say that they will advise you. And so they will therefore, in a sense, both set the examination question and answer it. They're setting their own question. Now, this is completely inappropriate in my view, because each LGPS fund is different. If you look at them, they are completely different in terms of their liability profiles, their membership, their funding levels, their size, their approach to investment. I work directly with 5 LGPSs across England and Wales, and I can tell you they are all completely different. In fact, I work with 3 London boroughs of those 5, so very close to each other, but they are all completely different, those 3, and they're within London and are, you know, similar size. So your investment strategy must be based on your individual circumstances. Do we really, that's what the investment consultants, the funds have worked with over the years, understand, etc. Is it credible that pools which don't have investment strategy provision at this point can suddenly develop it overnight and then provide an individual service to meet the needs of the 86? I leave you to answer that question. There is in this a provision whereby they admit it actually at one stage in paragraph 40. I think they actually sort of agree that perhaps the pools can't do this, but then they say, but what we could do is get the pools to commission the existing investment consultants to work via them and provide the advice. Well, I suggest to you that is just as bad as the pools providing it, because the investment consultants then would not be working for the funds, they'd be working for the pools. So you'd be bringing the same, I would suggest, problematic proposal in by another route. And that would compromise the relationship between investment consultants and funds. The other thing here, of course, is we're setting up what is effectively a fiduciary management model, which is where a provider sets investment strategy and then implements it. That happens widely in the private sector, but there's a big difference. In the private sector, the pension fund chooses the fiduciary and usually then puts someone in place to hold them tightly to account. What this proposal encompasses is your pool becomes your provider, but you can't sack your pool. And there is very, I think, limited provision in this consultation for proper scrutiny. That is another reason why the existing arrangements with investment consultants need to stay, because they need to be there to help the pools the funds scrutinise the pools in terms of their delivery of investment strategy. So proposals 1 and 2 talk about proposal 1 talk about implementation of investment strategy be fully delegated. No one has a problem, I think, in the LGPS, and it's a good idea for pools to carry out investment strategy where they can provide vehicles that meet the needs of funds, and no one has an issue with that. However, you can only have full delegation where a pool meets the needs of a fund, and there are various funds which have pooled a lot of their assets but haven't pooled them all because the pool cannot meet the investment strategy, and until a pool can, I would suggest it's unreasonable for any fund to simply delegate. I know Nottinghamshire hasn't delegated everything, and I think the reason potentially is that your pool doesn't yet have all the vehicles to properly implement your investment strategy. It has some, but not all. So this idea we can implement investment strategy and transfer all assets by 2026 nationally, I suspect is somewhat problematic. There is a proposal all pools now become FCA regulated. Well, your pool, LGPS Central is. 5 of the 8 pools are already regulated, 3 aren't. But actually, under the 2015 guidance, there is no reason whatsoever that the pool shouldn't be regulated. It doesn't have to be. They've now changed their minds on that. That they argue various reasons for this in the consultation, and I suspect this will become a requirement. But what they've also said is that all pools now need to sort of submit plans as to how they're going to fully implement the new pooling regime that's in the consultation, which is both one of investment strategy and one of investment implementation. So this isn't actually easy, this consultation for pools. It gives pools far more powers, but it's very, very clear in this that the pools are going to have to tell government exactly how they're going to do it. So none of the pools, whether they're FCA regulated or not, can assume that they're going to exist going forward, or that they will have, in inverted commas, free rein. I think this consultation is very clear that the government is going to have increasing oversight of pooling and therefore the LGPS. And this is, I have to say, in line with previous developments over the years and the previous trend we've seen. One of the issues is about the requirement to transfer legacy assets to the management of the pool. This is very tricky, actually, because in that they include illiquid legacy assets. Now, illiquid legacy assets are primarily private market vehicles, such as closed-ended infrastructure and closed-ended private equity. Now, an LGPS fund will have no role in actually determining the investments of these particular vehicles, and the agreements you enter into to go into those vehicles normally mean that leaving them early can result in significant financial penalties. So what you do is you enter into the vehicle and you monitor it, but you wait for the investment returns to come back to you, and you take them when they come back, and hopefully they'll be successful. This proposal to transfer such assets to a pool is completely illogical, because the pool can't change the investment return. All that will happen is the pool will need to recruit staff it hasn't got. There'll be an awful lot of expense. Then when they're actually managing these particular investments, which actually is just monitoring them and then administering the payments, they will deduct money from the payments to cover their own expenses, and so therefore the LGPS funds will get back less money than they would otherwise. So again, this is a completely illogical proposal. So essentially what we're saying here is that LGPS pools are to become far more powerful, and funds basically will lose their investment role. That's what's been suggested here. And there's also in here a template that they suggest that LGPS funds use for their investment asset allocation, to put down their strategic asset allocation. That table, I have to say, is seriously defective in my view. It's far too brief, and if that was to be put into the actual regulations, it would not allow funds to be specific enough about their investment strategy. It would give pools far too much leeway to do what they want in terms of implementation. So that's really the pooling element. The local investment element. Well, you remember local investment, that was a big issue of the previous consultation when the government was using the term levelling up. They're not using the term levelling up now, they're using the term local investment, but it's a similar concept. What they are now saying, basically, is that the pools should be responsible for appraising local investment opportunities and making decisions as to whether they're invested in. Now, administrative authorities can recommend them and propose them, but they wouldn't have a decision-making role. So again, we lose more decision-making from the local authority. I think there is some development, though, from the 2023 consultation, some perhaps logical development, whereby they are talking now about the administrative authorities and the pools working together with combined authorities, sort of on a regional basis, to seek to, develop local investment opportunities. The issue here, though, is that this will work better in some parts of the country than others, potentially, if it does work at all. For example, in London, I can see a logic to having the local investment on a regional basis, because in London, the administrative authorities in the London pool are all within the Greater London area, and you have the Greater London Authority. So you have a regional authority which is coterminous with the areas of a pool and the LGPS funds there. That's not the case, for example, with Borders to Coast, which has the Cumbria Fund at one end of the country in the northwest, and has the Surrey Fund at the other end of the country in the southeast. I don't see how that's sort of coterminous at all. So that's perhaps more difficult. But I think one of the big issues here is the idea that pools can do due diligence on and then effectively manage stroke monitor local investments going forward. This will be a huge task. It will require an incredible amount of recruitment and retention. And what I would say again is, can they do it? Do we really believe that people who are working in private market illiquid asset managers who may pay significant salaries are going to move en masse to the LGPS pools? Question mark. By the way, I should have said when we talk about the investment consultancy proposal earlier about the idea that the pools will provide investment consultancy advice. Is it really credible, do I ask, that people who are working for the major international or national investment consultants, with all the opportunities they offer, for work across a huge range of pensions and other investment issues, with a multiplicity of providers, would give up those careers to join our LGPS pool simply to do investment strategy work for LGPS funds? Again, I raise that question with you and leave you to answer it. So local investment also is a theme of this, because the government want growth. They've come up with what I think is a theoretically better model than perhaps in the past, this idea of working together with combined authorities, administrative authorities and pools. But there's a big gap here. They don't really mention the administrative authorities in their role other than as a pension fund. But if you think of an administrative authority like Nottinghamshire, it's a pension fund, but it's also a council. And clearly needs to be an involvement of the councils in this. And that's not spelled out so much. So perhaps this model, could potentially work to some extent, but it's going to involve a huge amount of work and resourcing of the pools. And I just question whether they can actually achieve that. The third element of the consultation is a very positive one in my view. That those who've been around for some time will recall the good governance in the LGPS review of 2018 to 2021. That was a fundamental review commissioned by the Scheme Advisory Board. It came up with a host of very positive recommendations. I was very privileged to be the independent advisor representative on the working groups that advised on those on that particular huge piece of work. And after 3 years, the government has finally come back and is now proposing in this consultation between paragraphs really 85 onwards to implement much of that. And I think particularly it's issues such as governance and training, the requirement to have a senior officer, the requirement to have an independent governance review, the improvements in knowledge and skills that are to be required. All of those things I think are very positive and should be welcomed. I'm sure most ones will. There's also a proposal there to enhance the role of independent advisors, again, which I think is helpful, so long as those independent advisors, as I say in the report, are in addition to the existing investment consultants and not instead of. Because if they are instead of, that would be a severe weakening of the present system, because no independent advisor, and I've been one now since 2011, can have the knowledge and resources that a major investment consultancy firm has. How can an individual or small group of people have the resources of an authorised investment consultant? They can't. So this is a good proposal in terms of adding to the governance and scrutiny of LGPS, and I particularly welcome the idea that independent advisors should cover all of governance, investment and administration, and not just investment. This is the case in some places, because governance and administration are hugely important, and if there's a problem in the LGPS, I suggest it's more likely to come from administration than it ever is from investment. So there's lots of proposals there which are very positive. There's also some proposals towards the end on the governance of the pools. This again, I think, indicates that there's a question about how far government, and it's not just in this present consultation, this is, been going back to 2015, really believes that the people who own the pools, that's the funds, because remember, Nottinghamshire is a part owner of Central, just as the London boroughs are part owners of the London pool. Because in paragraphs 119 to 21, it covers requirements on pool company boards. And it states, and I'll quote, boards should also include 1 or 2 representatives for the group of shareholder. I mean, that language, 1 or 2 representatives, it's hardly tight and businesslike. It almost, to my mind, perhaps they should have 1 or 2 people there just to have a look. I think there needs to be absolute clarity of genuine representation from the stakeholders, that's the administrative authorities within a pool, on the pool board, and the people who need to be sent there shouldn't be sent there because of status. They should be sent there because of their knowledge and ability to constructively contribute to a board and constructively and positively hold to account the pool for the implementation of the investment strategies of the administrative authorities. Because the one thing to remember, and the final thing to remember, is that if there is any diminution of investment returns, if there's any issues from all of this, ultimately it falls back on the employers to pick up the deficit and to pick up the bill. So the LGPS funds need to be right in there with their pools, scrutinising them at all times and making sure they are delivering what the LGPS funds need at all times, and that is their first and last focus. I'll stop there. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I know I haven't gone through every line of this because it would take us all day. I have spent probably the time I suggested to the chair I would spend on briefing you, and I did suggest to him I would spend some time. I've tried to sort of cover it in general and give you some further views. More than happy to answer any questions on the consultation. Thank you.
I'll open it up to the floor. Any questions?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of pros and cons and pros and all the rest of it about the way forward. And as I understand it, pensions are there so that after 40 years you pay into a pension fund and you've got a pension that's there for you when you retire by today's standard. And you can say here that you just get a bit worried when somebody wants to cream off some of your pension fund and put it into investment somewhere that you've got no control over, and it could be into something that collapses and we lose out, and that at the end of the day, that money belongs to the members. It doesn't belong to anybody else, it belongs to members, and they're the ones that have paid it in along with their employer. to take the right away from them, then that doesn't seem right to me. So, having made those few comments, and I don't agree with some of them, have been trying to keep abreast of what government wants to do and how they want to grow and how they want to use pension funds for investment and all the rest of it. That's what individuals want. And I mean, we have a system where we do get growth in pensions, and as you said, we're 107% now. I don't know, Nottinghamshire or someone. I remember when we were 75%, and you know, we got it up now where employees of the fund know that when the day comes, they'll get what they believe to be their due rights, and going into this puts it at risk, and that would worry me. But I don't know, John. Having said all you said, you didn't conclude by saying anything about your view of the way forward.
I'll give you my view of the way forward very, very clearly. My view of the way forward, and I think this is in line with the initial pooling guidance of 2015, is that the individual LGPS fund must retain control of investment strategy, and this should be reasonable control of it, not at a very high level as proposed in this consultation, should be able to specify its investment strategy across asset classes, given its, for example, its views on active and passive management. It should also be able to determine regional allocations, for example, to UK, to other developed markets, to emerging markets. It should be able to for example, determine within, say, property, allocations to core plus, housing, long lease, etc. To different types of infrastructure. So it should be, quite a detailed investment strategy it should be able to set. That strategy then, I do agree, ultimately, should be implemented by the fund, by the pools in the long term, because that's the way that all governments are going. However, only on the premise that they can deliver investment vehicles which can implement that strategy reasonably. If they cannot provide an investment vehicle that can implement the strategy, the reasonable strategy of a fund, then a fund should not be required to transfer an asset into a pool to meet an unreasonable, into an unreasonable vehicle. Now, I do differentiate from a few funds who I think have deliberately, and there's a very few, deliberately decided they won't play with pooling. They won't adhere to it. I think that is a mistake because there are advantages to pooling if it's done correctly and positively. More collaboration, greater diversity of opportunities, scale, etc. But it needs to be done properly. Pooling in itself is not an end. And what really worries me about this consultation is the LGPS regulations are very clear who is responsible for administering the scheme locally. It's Regulation 53, if I recall, it's 2013 regulations. It's the administering authority, in this case, Nottinghamshire. It's not a pool. It's not a pool. It is Nottinghamshire. It is Waltham Forest. It is the Wirral. It is Barking and Dagenham. It is Haringey. I've just mentioned the 5 I work with. They are the administering authority. Their pool is an instrument for them to achieve their investment returns. So my view, Councillor, very clearly is strategy, and genuine strategy remains with yourselves, advised by an investment consultant appointed by yourselves through competition and who is periodically reviewed. Yeah, not by the pool, who A, do not have the ability to do it at this point, B, I question whether they ever will, because I question whether sufficient people would ever leave the major investment consultants to join pools. So what career development would that be for them? And C, I think there's a real potential conflict of interest. If you're setting the exam question and you then answer it, well, how can you fail? In your own terms, but it isn't about the pool. It's about the funds, and ultimately it's about the members, because let's go back to the issue about people getting their pensions. It doesn't matter to the individual member of the scheme, for example, me, what happens with the investments, because the regulations guarantee I will get paid out my benefits to the penny. But if there is a shortfall, someone has to pick it up, and the answer there is the employer. Now, Nottinghamshire County Council, the employer. If Nottinghamshire County Council has to pick up more, what's he going to do? It's going to have to cut services. Now, I'm not suggesting which services you cut, but I'll make this observation about any council that is a provider of adult and children's services. That will be the biggest part of their budget and the most vital part, dealing with the most deprived and vulnerable people in the country, potentially. Yeah. So look, my question is, if there was a shortfall, if pooling failed, who picks it up? Question mark in the end. The local authorities, and potentially through reduction in services, perhaps some of the most vulnerable people. So that's why, in my view, the administrative authority must always remain in control of the investment strategy, because that is the primary determinant. And the success of the administrative authorities is proved by the last valuation, 107% funding level nationally, and your fund in surplus as well. So I think that's, I hope, a very clear answer, Councillor, to where I think responsibility should lie.
Okay, thank you. Let's look. I don't know, Kelly, what the way forward is in consultation, but a lot of that I would agree with.
Right, thank you very much, Sean. Any questions from the floor? None for me, but I'll just have an interesting one, which is you mentioned about the pooling and the fact that if a pool was to fail under this new investment manager that they should have, obviously the responsibility will fall back onto the pool. Will that fall back onto the pool as a company, or as you mentioned that the ultimate responsibility will be to the administrating bodies of that pool? Just wanted a bit of clarification on that.
Well, Chair, I think it can only ultimately, any failure can only ultimately fall back on the administrative authorities, because the pool has no money of its own. The only way the pool is going to generate any money for itself to pay its fees is by taking, a management fee essentially from the LGPS funds, either directly from them, by getting a budget contribution out of the pension fund, or by charging, a management fee in addition to that which the external asset manager charges. Any sort of, and also, of course, the investment returns belong to the funds, not to the asset, not to the pool. So if the investment returns were not to be, what was hoped for, then, that falls back on the funds. So that is why it is so important that the fund set investment strategy, because investment strategy determines most returns. And then so long as you can get reasonable managers, which, the pool should be able to provide, but we need to make sure they do, and they're very, rigorously monitored. And that's why we need high level and detailed scrutiny of the pools on an ongoing basis. They need to be monitored both by members and officers on an ongoing basis, and there needs to be proper representation on pool boards and other pool bodies, committees, because the pool is there simply and solely to deliver the implementation of investment strategies, i.e. to invest the money on behalf of the fund. If they succeed, then the funds will succeed. If they, in inverted commas, don't succeed, then the funds won't succeed. It's as simple as that. This all comes back to the funds, and that is why it is so important that the funds are not marginalised in all of this. They are not marginalised in terms of their role in investment, because ultimately, as the councillor absolutely correctly said, it's not government money. It's actually not public money, because it's a very interesting case here now. The last government was involved in a case where they tried to argue about what basically LGPS was public money. This went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, it's not public money. It's actually the members' money. Now, the members don't control it. It's held in a sort of quasi-trust position by the administrative authority who deals with it. But actually, the money in the pension fund is not public money, according to the Supreme Court of England. It is the members' money, which is administered by the LGPS fund, i.e. the administrative authority.
Thank you very much for that, John. I think it was also just to help clarify new members, so you kind of get an idea of where responsibilities are, and that's why I asked that question. And thank you very much, John, for answering it. All right. The next, what we need to do next is,
Could I just have a
yeah, sure.
word? Sorry, I was just listening and sort of trying to, take all of it what was said, and just for the new members, so that you're aware, similar report and consideration was given at the committee in December, so the pensions fund committee, and my understanding is that there will be a formal response to the consultation coming from the committee, and I'll defer to Sarah or Joe on this if that's okay. But would it be appropriate to share that with board members once that formal response from committee is available, so that people can get a handle on what the authority response from the committee point of view is when that happens.
So a draft response has been drafted and signed off by Councillor Kerry, Chair of the Pensions Committee, to be submitted on behalf of the Nottinghamshire Fund's behalf. I think it's probably pertinent to check with Councillor Kerry that he's happy for it to be circulated to board members. I don't believe there will be an issue, but I think it's just appropriate just to check with him and then send it.
Yeah, we can.
I'll take that as an action then. No.
We can wrap that up as some sort of formal action arising from this meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. The next, what we need to do on this item is have a vote on the recommendation, which is on page 24, which is that the pension board receives and considers the report of the advisor of the pension board, identifying any actions required. For that, can I have a vote? Can I have those for? Thank you. Yeah, that's thank you very much. The vote has been carried. We shall move on to the next item, which is the LGPS Pension Administration Report, Performance Report, and I'll be led through Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. The Admin Performance Report covers the period the 1st of April 2023 through to the 31st of March 2024. Another busy year for pensions administration. As well as business as usual, processing retirements, deaths, starters and leavers, the team have continued to work on national projects. So the national projects currently being worked on are the MacLeod, which is about the discrimination case that was brought by firefighters and judges, which has now been extended over other public sector schemes. So our work continues in collecting data from scheme employers, system updates, and then implementation of the MacLeod remedy. Team are also working on the National Pension Dashboard project, which will see LGPS funds connect to the National Dashboard Eco Scheme by the 31st of October this year. Resourcing and recruitment continue to be challenging for all funds. Board will know that the approach that we've taken at Nottinghamshire is to actually grow our own. And we employed 4 apprentices back in January 2024 on an 18-month pension administration apprenticeship. These 4 individuals are really quite outstanding and have really started to show to the administration team the value that they are bringing. And my plan will be that we will see an ongoing programme of engagement of apprentices. Within the team, we've also seen internal promotion to more senior position. So really our approach to recruitment and resourcing is to enable that development of our staff from those entry posts, develop them into more senior posts, and then bring in staff at our entry posts and allow them to develop and create a career in pensions. The Knots Fund also continues to benefit from the support of other teams from within the Business Service Centre. So, for example, the Business Hub provide a centralised clerical and administration service to the pensions team. So, when a recruitment pack comes in to the team, they review that pack, make sure that all the appropriate fields have been filled in. We've got birth and marriage certificates, etc. If we don't, then they return it. So that actually when that retirement pack is then ultimately scanned onto the system, the pension officer has everything that they need in which to process that retirement through to payment. So other teams that the fund benefits from are the fact that the pension administration system team sits as part of the overall competency centre within the business services centre. Pension payroll is managed by the payroll team from within the county council, and also all the accounting of income, contributions, etc. is undertaken by the accounting and income team. So the fund is benefiting from the economies of scale brought by integrating that work within the BSC. Going forward, we're looking to expand the use of the council's customer service centre. Last year, we used the customer service centre to handle telephone calls that came about following the distribution of both the deferred and active benefit statements. What we're currently working on is to transfer all calls from our dedicated pension number up to the customer service centre. We then use the customer service centre to filter out the straightforward calls, such as change of name and address, but also to use that service to verify personal details. This is really a precursor to us then moving to the members portal. So part of that work from the customer service centre is they will be verifying the members' home address, their email address and their mobile telephone number. What this project is looking to do is to then release skilled pensions officers, release their capacity to enable them to consolidate on the pension areas such as retirements, transfers, etc. Within the report, I've also detailed the SIPFA benchmarking stats, the cost per member. To really just put this into some context, there are now only 14 LGPS funds that do submit returns to the SIPFA benchmarking club. We at Nottinghamshire continue to feel that this provides value to us, and whilst the County Council have chosen to no longer be part of SIPFA, the administration service is still contributing on an annual basis. So from within the report, you will see that this provides the average cost per member across the 14 funds. It's important to say that this is a comparison of apples and pears in the fact that we're not really clear. We know what we input as our return, but that is not necessarily consistent with other funds. But what you can see from here is that the average cost per member within the Nottinghamshire Fund is £16.65. Of the figures produced in the report, the lowest cost per member is shown from Oxfordshire at £7.63 and the highest for Southwark at £142.11. Data quality, and I think the board. I've talked to the board a lot about data quality and the impact that poor data coming into the fund has on our ability to deliver our service. You'll also be aware that we've undertaken a huge amount of work over a number of years to improve our data. And whilst the report shows that our sort of scores have remained static over the last 2 years, it's important that that is set in the context of the McLeod data collection. Whilst we continue to collect McLeod data to verify that and to load it, clearly our data scores are not seeing significant improvement. Once that data collection has been completed and loaded, my expectation is that we will see an improvement in those scores. Membership of the fund continues to increase across all categories. The total membership of the Nottinghamshire Fund is now over 160,000 members. Scheme employers again have increased from 545 to 566. What you heard earlier from Andy was the consolidated figure. So the figures I've given you here are individual scheme employers. Again, within the report, I've detailed the number of independent disputes where members have initiated the formal complaints procedure. I think this table demonstrates the small number of complaints against the size of the actual membership of our fund. These types of complaints are often very complex and require considerable amount of investigation, leading through then to the stage one judgment. So for the fund, I sit as the stage one adjudicator. Each scheme employer then has their own stage one adjudicators as well. If anybody wishes to pursue to stage two, then that then comes into another area within the administering authority, so it is looked at by a second independent individual. The year-end table shows an increase in returns received by our deadline and a small increase in accuracy. And obviously you heard from Andy in response to Councillor Dare's question over general sort of data responses and how that has improved over the last few years. As I responded in an earlier question, we will be reviewing the administering strategy over the final quarter of this year, with a view to starting to report on the performance of scheme employers on their responsibilities across the fund. I'm expecting that administration strategy review will develop a set of key performance indicators to enable us to report on scheme employer performance, and these will be presented to both Pensions Committee and Pensions Board. Detailed within the report are the performance data tables that we have been reporting consistently to Pension Committee and Board over the last few years. Members of the board will see there's been an increase in the number of processes completed by just under 10%. I expect to see this significantly increase going forward due to the work that we've undertaken over the last 6 to 9 months on automating some of our processes. So we've now built an automated process for processing leavers, refunds and aggregations. Whilst we've worked closely with our system provider, Civica, we've also worked closely with other LGPS funds, such as Cheshire and the local pension partnership organisation. From this position, what we're looking to do is that we will develop an automated process. They will develop automated processes on a different task, and then we will actually benefit from each other's automated processes, so thereby increasing our ability to automate more and more processes. The performance tables also show an increase in the number of processes that are meeting the key performance indicators, with an increase of just under 11%. The fund continues to see an increase in requests from deferred beneficiaries over 55. Analysis is showing that when we send out quotes, which we do, or the deferred benefit statement on an annual basis, we then get a substantial increase in contact for members wishing to have an estimate for different ages between 55 and state pension age. What we're doing to address this, what I would call avoidable contact, is that the deferred benefit statements from June, July of this year would actually demonstrate or detail to a deferred beneficiary what their pension benefits may be at 55, 56, 57, right through to state pension age. Invariably, there is a very small actuarial reduction between different years depending on the circumstances of the member, and we think that this may enable a number of deferred beneficiaries to determine to take their pension earlier when they see it's only a very small reduction. Deaths. Again, detailed within the report is a table that demonstrates that there's been a significant reduction following the COVID years. However, the analysis of deaths in more recent years show there's been a significant number of increase in members who have been passing away between the age of 30 and 55. Complexity of paying death grants also continues to cause significant work for the pension fund. Often members have quite complex family situations these days, living within a blended family with children or partners over a much wider area. So these are taking time for us to ensure that we are collecting the appropriate details of beneficiaries before continuing to pay out death grants, etc. We continue to work on the new KPIs that have been issued by the Scheme Advisory Board, and we will be looking to report on an expanded list of KPIs going forward. We're working closely with Joe to have a look at what that Scheme Advisory annual report guidance is going forward. That concludes this year's annual performance report. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions from the floor? I just want Councillor there.
Sorry. No, it's very comprehensive, so we can be pleased and thankful for that. I was just wondering, from Sarah's point of view, when she prepares this, is there any escalation of problems that you'd like to see going the other way as far as the fund and the administration of it is concerned? You know, what would ease the pressure on the administration if certain things went in a different way?
I'd come back to data. I'd come back to scheme employers providing their data, accurate data, in a timely manner, responding to queries in a timely manner. I think that's why one of my reasons for asking Andy and his team to review the admin strategy and develop that section around scheme employers' performance, because that I think is that sort of performance of scheme employers is not seen by the committee or the board in any great detail. Clearly, we provide a year-end table that says, you know, X percentage responded by the deadline, X percentage was accurate. Part of that is addressed by moving to the portal and subsequently the monthly returns, because what happens currently is the data comes into us. We then are validating or verifying it and going back to the scheme employer. What the monthly return process will do is it will run a series of data validation checks ahead of the employer submitting it. If though that sort of like members' data fails those checks, then that data doesn't get submitted, so the issue remains with the employer to address. It's their members' data, it's their employees' data, and I think it's like Joanne's point earlier, you know, for me that will generate greater efficiency. I think the other thing for me is starting to really use the technology within the system. Councillor Day, you'll know my sort of interest has always been in technology, in process, that actually we need to use the system to automate the more mundane, straightforward tasks, so that actually you release the capacity within the pensions office to concentrate on the, shall we say, more interesting, more complex work. But running something through an automated process, it runs end to end if all the data's there. So obviously what we've been doing, and that the lever process does something like 43 data validation checks, so it is significant. And clearly if you put that type of a process in place, but you asked a human to do it, you can see the time differences. But the building that process, I think, just highlights again where we've still got room for improvement with data. Where the process goes end to end and all the data's there, it's probably from producing the letter out at the other end, approximately 6 minutes. If you get somebody to do a case, it's probably 40 to 45. So from a productivity, efficiency, you can see where I'm leading, wanting to lead the team too. But again, as we work on the data, that will improve, but that's not going to be an overnight thing. I think the other thing for us is around recruiting individuals and training them, and for them to see that they have a career path within pensions. I think I've said before, pensions isn't seen as a sexy thing, but actually once you get in there, there's all sorts of different facets that people can work within. Hopefully the LGPS is here for many years to come, and that they have that career path. But I think from a NOTS fund perspective, that sort of approach to grow our own, bring apprentices in, give them time to also attain a qualification, but also if they are ambitious, that they can see they've got promotion prospects all the way up to potentially being pensions manager. That then clearly for me that's something that I would like to see us continue to develop on. We still get thrown at us things from left field, from government, so cloud, GMP, national dashboards. I'm sure there'll be other things to come from the current government. Who knows what they will be going forward. But I think, the team do really an outstanding job in fairly difficult circumstances.
Mark?
Thank you for that, sir. Just a quick question regarding, obviously we're all conscious of fraud, etc. People still transferring out of scheme, so there's a process in place to protect them sort of people. Thank you.
So the transfer process is very detailed and complex, and there is a raft of due diligence checks. There is also a list of all schemes where they are colour coded, red, amber and green. So if somebody was asking to transfer out to a red scheme, the due diligence does not allow that to take place. We don't support any of that, and that's appropriate. If members, where they're looking to transfer out more than their pot is more than 30,000, they also have to have independent financial advice, and we have to receive a signed document from an IFA or the appropriate body that's provided that financial advice. Clearly, scams continue to become more and more sophisticated each year as both the deferred and the active benefit statements are sent out. Enclosed within that document is also a document about scams as well. So yes, I think certainly over the last few years, that whole process of somebody requesting a quote, completing the due diligence checks, and then finally the transfer going out or a transfer coming into us, has really become more robust. We have there's different types of transfers. So inter-fund transfers, so somebody may transfer from Notts LGPS to Derbyshire LGPS or Leicestershire LGPS. That obviously doesn't have to go through the same rigour because that's an LGPS to an LGPS. But if people are transferring out to SIPs or certainly overseas, that's where that list of accredited funds really comes in. Members do get quite upset when we say no, you can't transfer out, because they think it's their right to, but I'm sure they would be the first that are coming back to us if what they transferred out to then meant that they didn't have pension provision coming in future years. So yeah, there was a process.
the reverse gap analysis action plan and progress to date, and 2, that the board agrees to receive further updates on the progress of the fund in implementing the action plan. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you very much. I'll now invite Joe Toomey to introduce the report.
Thank you. Those of you who have been around a little while will remember that on the 10th of January last year, the Pension Regulator published their new General Code of Practice, and that came into force from the 27th of March. On the back of that, the Fund commissioned Barnet-Waddingham to undertake a reverse gap analysis, and this assessed the Fund's compliance with that new code. You can see a copy of the reverse gap analysis with a few comments from the Fund at Appendix A to the report. And that process also reflected the recommendations that arose from the Good Governance Review that John mentioned earlier in his update. The outcome for us was really encouraging. Of the 53 areas that the review covered, 12 didn't apply to the LGPS, 28 didn't require us to take any further action. We've used those recommendations to produce an action plan, which is Appendix B to the report. Now, some of the actions that are included in that action plan were areas where recommendations were made, but we weren't required to take action in order to comply with the code. It was about enhancing what we already had in terms of practices and documentation, or preempting those good governance recommendations. A number of the items that were identified through that gap analysis and in the action plan involved updates to the Fund's policies. You've got a list of them within the report. These have now all been approved by the Pension Fund Committee, so they're in place and they are published on the Fund's website. We've also formed 2 new, I'll call them policies, which are the training strategy and the conflict of interest protocol. The report gives a bit of an overview about the purposes of each of these, and then you've obviously also within your agenda pack got copies for you to read, mark and inwardly digest. Within the action plan, we've updated it with the progress so far. It's the expectation of the regulator that actions will be implemented by the end of the current financial year. So what we're proposing is, post that, we'll bring you an update that reflects what position we're in, and hopefully we'll be showing you that everything is all completed, we're as compliant as we can be, recognising that it is an evolving environment, so we'll constantly be having to look back, review and just make sure that we retain that compliance.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for being so concise on that report. And there's a lot of stuff to go through, but one of the things that came out is that we've got 5 ambers and we're right on the others, so which is absolutely fantastic if you consider the number of items on there. So, any questions from the floor? No? Okay. So we should just move on to the vote on the recommendations.
Chair, could I just make a brief? Could I just make a brief comment, Chair?
Yes, sure, John.
Could I just, from my point of view, commend the Fund for undertaking this review, and particularly I think for utilising Barnet-Waddingham, they're the actuary to the Fund, so they have a good understanding of the Fund, and also some of these recommendations, you know, do sort of cross into that sort of actuarial area in its broadest sense. And I think it is very positive that the Fund has A, done this, and B, actually published it in the public domain. I think it's much to the credit of the Fund that they've done that. And I'd just like to sort of place that on record from my point of view.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you. All right, so the vote, those for the recommendations. Yeah. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next. Sorry, I think like everybody else, I keep forgetting to press the button.
It's all right.
All right. Which is item 9, which is the Local Pension Board Code of Practice. Okay, I think, are you going, is this an addition or is this? to your other one? It's separate. Oh, okay. It's just because I picked when I was reading, there were a few themes that were coming out, so just wanted to concentrate on the salient points. So I would like to propose a recommendation on page 137 of the agenda pack that the board approves the revised local pensions board code of practice as attached in Appendix A to the report. Do I have a seconder? So 137 of the pack. Yeah. And I think I've already got a seconder. So Joe, would you mind taking us through?
Thank you. You're right in linking it to the previous item because a couple of the recommendations from the reverse gap analysis related to this. So it seemed like a good opportunity to dust it off, check through it generally, and just make sure that it is still fit for purpose, does what we need it to do, and incorporates those actions that are relevant to the new code. Just to quickly give you a canter through the proposed changes, there are a few small changes to reflect the way the fund is governed more broadly. At the time the document was originally drafted, we had not only a pension fund committee, but we also had a couple of subcommittees that sat underneath it. So the emphasis is just changed a little bit so that it's clear that at present we've just got the one. We could choose to have more further down the line if we think that is an appropriate form of governance for us. So it still keeps that flexibility there, but just makes it a little bit closer to what we've got. We've got clarifications in there about the role of the chair, which is in line with the recommendations from the gap analysis. So that just sets out, in addition to some of the provisions in the council's constitution, a little bit about what Tulani's role is in these meetings, how they're managed, and just adds a little bit of seasoning on top of what we've currently got. We've also built in there a proposal that will give the board an option to have a vice chair. Now, you've never chosen to have one before, and it wouldn't require you to have one, but something to think about in terms of resilience. The way it's proposed is that if, for instance, as you have now, you have a member representative as chair, you would then have an employer representative as vice chair, or vice versa, just so that, obviously, if that was something you weren't comfortable with, we can look at amending that. It was just a proposal based on arrangements elsewhere. It's about what works for us, so we have the flexibility to decide that. There are also a couple of small updates to reflect the new conflicts of interest protocol and the training strategy. An adjustment in the language to reflect the council's move away from County Hall. A proposed update about the way the board deals with urgent business. The previous version referred a lot to telephone calls. Obviously, since this was originally drafted in 2015, we've all become a lot more used to using things like Teams, so wanted to build that in there as an additional option for us if it was appropriate. And finally, the other amendment relates to wording around budget section, so that again it better reflects the way we currently operate, and actually it gives a little bit more flexibility in how we do. So yeah, a bit of a canter through. I appreciate it's a bit breakneck speed, but hopefully fairly comprehensive in terms of telling you what's changed.
Thank you. Any questions, John? I realise you've got. Is that a legacy hand or? Okay, okay. Right. Any questions from the floor on that, on the update? Right. We'll just move on to the vote for the recommendation that the local pensions board approve the revised local pensions board code of practice as attached in Appendix A. Thank you very much. Right. The next item is the risk management strategy. This report updates the board on the adoption of a new risk management strategy by the fund, as well as revisions to the fund's risk register. This report has an exempt appendices to be considered in closed session at the end of the meeting. So please do not refer to exempt information at this time. I'd like to propose the recommendation on page 149 of the agenda pack that the board notes the updated risk management strategy, including the monitoring and reporting arrangements. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you very much. And I'll now invite Sarah Stevenson to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this report updates the board on the adoption of the new risk management strategy for the fund, plus our ongoing work reviewing the fund's risk register. Risk management obviously is a key element of the fund's overall framework of internal control and its approach to good governance. The fund's risk management strategy sets out its risk appetite and how it will manage risks that have been identified. At the meeting of Pensions Committee on the 12th of December, the new or the updated risk management strategy was approved, and this is attached to Appendix A. The fund has also been reviewing its risk strategy or its risk register, and we have discussed the risk register at all of the board meetings over the years. Previously, the fund has published its risk register fully into the public domain, and clearly this therefore exposes the fund to risk, because obviously we've told people what are the risks to the fund. So we've discussed that with Matt Hardwick from Zurich, who you all know has been supporting the fund in reviewing its risk register, and it's been agreed that the contents are sensitive and not for sharing openly, and therefore that's why the actual detail of the risk register will in future be considered as an exempt item. So we have been working with Zurich over the course of the last year to review the risks and to also to consider a different format, which I'll take you through shortly. And we have looked to therefore split the risks down into strategic risks, separate out investment risks, separate out the administration risks, and also when we do identify, also separate out governance risks. We've also provided some training in a working party, which board members were invited to during 2024. And at the committee meeting on the 13th of February, Matt Hardwick from Zurich will be joining us to take the committee through our proposal for a deep dive of risks going forward. Also, the risk register has been reviewed in light of the Regulator's Code of Practice that was issued in October 2024. So we have removed some risks. They are shown in paragraph 10. We have also added in some new risks as well. And obviously going forward, what our plan will be, and we'll be doing that on the 13th of February with Pensions Committee, is to demonstrate what a deep dive of a particular risk is, and we'll also look to share that same documentation with the board at the next meeting on the 3rd of April. And then going forward, the plan will be to enable committee and board to select a risk off the risk register, which we'll then take away and do a deep dive on, and then come back and show you what that deep dive looks like. I think it will be really important that we get engagement from both committee and board, and that board and committee challenges as to the mitigations we're looking to put in place, whether you think there's something that we've missed, whether you think there's something that's more important. It will be really important going forward that that's very much a two-way conversation. So that really concludes the open report, and obviously I'll take you into more detail when we come to the exempt part of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Just for me, just a thank you for the risk deep dive template produced, because I think that's really good. It gives us an idea of what's going to be involved and the areas to look into, and if there's a deep dive that we need to, at least we've got a template to work on. So thank you very much for that. John, is that a legacy hand? Okay, right. John, you got a question?
That's a real hand. Yeah, no, I'd again just like to comment on this particular report. I think it's extremely positive that the fund has reviewed its approach to risk management. Risk management is absolutely fundamental to everything the fund does in terms of investment, in terms of governance, in terms of administration. And also a robust approach to risk is, in reality, the only real way that the pension committee and pension board can get inside fully the activities and problems and opportunities and threats that the fund faces. And the fact that we've looked at this, thought about it, brought in again an independent expert to work on it, I think is extremely positive. And what's in the exempt, I think, will help both the committee and the board going forward to constructively question, challenge, comment upon fund matters. And members of this board, and I look at the 3 long-standing members of this board, have all over the years used the old risk register very positively to ask some very cogent questions. And I think looking at what we've got now, that there's an even better opportunity going forward for members to do that. So I just really commend to the board the work of the officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And I think the board also concurs with the work that goes on that we don't see. So thank you very much for mentioning. All right, so the next, yeah.
Have we completed consideration of that?
Yeah, and no further questions? No. Okay.
No.
Okay. So we shall just have a vote on the okay. Vote on the recommendation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Shall now move on to the next item, which is item 11, which is the work program. I formally move the work program recommendation, which is on page 166 of the pack. Do members require any amendments to the work program?
Just to confirm that it is a live document and can't be liable to change. We're not setting our work program in stone at this meeting. We will respond to issues and areas as they arise.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think at the meeting on the 3rd of April, we've got cybersecurity as a standing item. We'll actually wrap that up within the revised risk register and show you a deep dive of that. So rather than 2 separate papers that will come together as one, requiring obviously that revised risk register and the cybersecurity element to be an exempt item.
I'm sorry.
Can we have some sort of
it's, to me, it's a very important subject that we don't lose grip of, because we don't want to lose control of our fund, and therefore we need to know how we're going to manage it on the way forward.
So just for clarity there, Councillor Adair, an update on the Fit for Future consultation and the outcomes that may or may not be known at that time. Yeah, I suppose I'll just look to John there around the likely timetable for government sort of response on the consultation.
I think, Sarah, it's going to be rapid. I mean, as I said earlier, this is a 9-week consultation. they have specifically, I've never seen this in an LGPS consultation before, specifically referred to the potential use of primary legislation. They have in the King's speech put in a pensions bill, which is a broad bill which could cover DC in the private sector and DB in the private sector and LGPS potentially, but I think DC and LGPS are the two areas where it will likely be covered because they have not looked at private sector DB at this point. It's DC and LGPS they've looked at. So it's quite likely, I think, they'll come back very quickly with a response. If you recall, the last time we had a consultation in 2023, they issued it in July and they responded by November, which was very, very quick. When you compare that with some of the previous consultations, for example, the one on climate change, I think of 2022, and we've still not heard back from them on it. We're now in 2025. The one on Fair Deal, which I think goes back even further, still not heard back. So the fact is that on the investment ones, certainly pooling, they came back very quickly the last time, and I think they have to come back even quicker if they want to put something into an Act of Parliament, if they feel that's what they want to do, which they've said. So I think they're not going to hang around. The other point is they've set this timescale, which I think is completely unrealistic, for 2026 to have this complete new pooling regime in, which they're proposing. The pool's doing everything, and all assets transferred by 2026. Well, if they wanted to do that, which I think if they do it, it'll be a very interesting situation. If they want to do that, they're going to have to move very quickly to put out a response and then get whatever they need to into either an Act of Parliament or at the very least LGPS regulations. So there's a huge amount of work to be done, because remember, nothing can be done until you put something into either an Act of Parliament or regulation or statutory guidance, and often all three, because one leads to the other. Act of Parliament is the vaguest, with a high level, then a reg, and then you've got statutory guidance. Anything in a consultation, remember, doesn't apply until it's been put into place by, one of those three things. And that's why, we had lots of issues in the last consultation, 2023. The government came back and said, we're going to do A, B, C, D, E, and F. Actually, they did virtually none of it before they left office, because they didn't put in place, between when they issued the consultation response and the general election, the necessary regulations and statutory guidance to implement it. So coming back and saying we'll do it is just one stage. To actually do it, you've got to go through the legislative process. And remember, that's complicated, because the writing of regulations and statutory guidance is very, very difficult, because you have to get the exact wording right. And the civil servants will have to really think about what they do when they get to that stage. So yeah, I think the answer to Sarah's question is they'll come back pretty quick, because they've got lots of other things to do to implement what I believe is a very strong lead from government to do it.
Thank you very much, John. And just to confirm that, yes, we'll make sure that for the next one that there'll be an update available for that. Right, the next item is it's an interesting one, and I'll explain a little bit more to the newer members. This is the exclusion to the public. Normally, this is an open meeting, so public and other people invited to be able to come in. But because we're going to be talking about exempt items, so this is the point where I would propose, and I'm going to propose, that the public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting on the grounds that the discussions are likely to involve disclosure of exempt information described, and Sarah mentioned it earlier, in Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Just checking that people have nodded and have got that. Do we agree that? Thank you. That concludes the public business of the board. We'll now go into the closed session. And please end the live stream.